So welcome. Thanks for being here for this session, this parenting seminar about how do we deal with technology in our homes. And this might sound a little bit overdramatic, but I actually think that technology has the power to be one of the most dangerous spiritual forces in our lives right now. That is, that technology can be an open door for so many things that can harm our souls temporarily, maybe even eternally. But as I said, it can sound a little bit overdramatic, and I want to say that on the other side of that, technology can also be one of the greatest forces for good. God can use it as one of the best ways to reach people at a distance with the gospel, to connect people in a way that people never were able to connect before, to link people in the world together in a way that they couldn't be linked before, and to give us opportunities to love and serve our neighbors in a lot of different ways. So technology really is not good or bad. It's a neutral thing that itself can be used for either extreme good or extreme evil. And we want to try to figure out, how do we harness this beast and make the most of it in our lives without letting it run our lives and our kids' lives. So that's our goal this morning as we go through this. And so let's start with a prayer. I'm going to pray, and then we'll get going into first. We got a little video segment to start with. Lord, thank you for the gift, the blessing that technology is, the ways that it has enriched and enhanced our lives, made us able to connect with more people more often, enhanced our productivity, given us so many entertainment choices, a lot of good things that have come through technology, but also we recognize it's not always good. And as we go through this morning's work, I ask that you would give all of us wisdom to apply to our lives your truth, so that we can make the most of this blessing, but also hold at bay the curses that it can bring. In Jesus' name, amen.
It's funny the things you forget. I went to see my mother the other day, and she told me this story that I'd completely forgotten about, how when we were driving together, she would pull the car over, and by the time she had got out the car and gone round the car to let me out the car, I would have already got out the car and pretended to have died. Because that's how you die. And I remembered that was a game I used to play with myself to entertain myself whenever I was bored or frustrated. Settle down. People say we live in an age of information overload, right? I don't know about that, but I just know that I get too many marketing emails. I got a marketing email from a supermarket firm, which will remain nameless for predominantly legal reasons, but which I'm going to call Safe Mart. I got an email from them, and it went like this. It said, just 3 weeks until Safe Mart at King's Cross opens. And I resented this, because not only do I not remember signing up to that, but I resent the fact that they appear to think that I should be excited about a shop opening. So what I did is I scrolled down to the bottom of the email, and I pressed unsubscribe. And I thought that'd be the end of it. But a week later, I got another one that said, just 2 weeks until Safe Mart at King's Cross opens. And I thought, well, obviously I haven't clicked hard enough, right? So I tried it again, right? Lo and behold, a week passes, you guessed it, just 1 week until Safe Mart at King's Cross opens. And here's the problem. The internet gave us access to everything, but it also gave everything access to us. You know, I think, right, it's hard enough to discriminate between the things that genuinely matter in this world and, you know, the minutiae of life without having emails about supermarket chains and Candy Crush Saga. And I was really annoyed with them. And I thought, okay, I was about to write a strongly worded email, which I can do quite well. And I thought, no, I'm going to find the game. So I replied to it and I said, I literally cannot wait. What do you need from me? They got back to me, this guy called Dan said, hi James, I've asked a colleague to help me with your query. Like it needs help. I said, what's the plan, Dan? I'm thinking fireworks, bouncy castle. I'm not sure what you mean. I said, I'm just tremendously excited about the opening. Do you want to put the bouncy castle or shall I? He said, I think you have misunderstood. A new store is opening, but there is no celebration plan. I said, but what was all the 3 weeks until 2 weeks until emails? I was getting excited. I'm sorry you're disappointed. I said, not to worry. Let's do something anyway. Besides, the deposit on the bouncy castle was non-refundable. If we don't use it, we're out a few £100, Dan. He said, Mr. Veach, I'm not responsible for anything you have ordered. I said, let's not get into who did what. Bottom line, you and I are in this together. Question, would you be there to make sure people take their shoes off? And I'll be honest, then my relationship with Dan deteriorated somewhat because the next email I got was this. Thanks for your email, your case number is... Oh, it's outrageous. I said, Dan? And I was just like, this is... And I said, Dan! And it just kept going. And I thought, this is terrible. All I'm doing is collecting case numbers. I said, D-Dog? The store is now open. I said, but Dan, I must have wondered why there was no bouncy castle. And then we were back to this. And that might have been the end of the story. But I remembered that anything, everything, even something as mundane as getting out of a car can be fun if you find the right game. So, this is what I replied. And we just, it was like we were dancing. It was just a beautiful relationship. We just kept going, and it was lovely. But to be honest, guys, it was quite labor-intensive, and you know, I had other stuff to do, believe it or not. And so what I did is I have a little email auto-replier program. And what I did is I set it up so every time it receives an email from SafeMart, it just pings one back, right? So I set it up, and it says, thanks for your email, your case number is, and then it has a little formula that I wrote to up the case number every time. And I put it on the server and set it running. I'll be honest, guys, then I forgot about it. I checked back on it the other day, and it appears there being a number of emails going back and... We're on 21,400. It gives me an immense sense of satisfaction to know that these computer programs are just going to be pinging one another, you know, for eternity. And as legacies go, I don't think that's bad. So guys, just remember, right, if ever you feel weighed down by the bureaucracy and often mundanity of modern life, don't fight the frustration. let it be the catalyst for whimsy. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
There's a lot of ways that as the world has access to us through these things, we can either fight it or we can find a way to make fun of it. That guy, by the way, if you have the chance to go on YouTube and look up James Beach, he's spent an extreme amount of time occupying the time of internet scammers as a sort of side hobby, and he's kind of a hero in a way, right? He's keeping them from attacking vulnerable adults through email scams. But number one predictor of how your children will handle technology is actually how you handle technology. Or to put it another way, your child's tech habits begin with your tech habits. And I maybe want to comment that this is changing a little bit in the last couple of years as at schools we're giving our kids more and more devices and screen time and homework through those things. And so even if we have a totally screen-free home, they're still exposed to it many hours a day at school, and that's, in many cases anyway, and that's influencing this a little bit to where we used to be able to say, well, parent, what you do is really the main influence, and now it seems like we're fighting that a little bit as parents. But I still believe that if we create a culture in our home of responsible use of technology, that's going to rub off on our children, and that's going to help them to understand. So we need to start by understanding our own tech habits. And I encourage you right now, actually, to pull out your phone if you have it with you. And you can go, if you've got an Apple device, to open up your general settings and then find the screen time. You just scroll through the thing on the sidebar there, find the thing that says screen time. It'll tell you about your screen time, and you can usually check back on multiple days, say, okay, today maybe, it's 9 o'clock, and hopefully you don't have, 3 hours of Facebook already, but maybe you do, and if you do, well, glad you're here. But if you don't, maybe scroll back a day or two and see how do I do more normally. If you're an Android, you just go to your settings and then you look for a thing called digital well-being. I use an Android device. This is a screenshot from my own phone on Thursday night at 7:06. 2 hours, 13 minutes, only 58 unlocks. You see just a handful of different apps. Facebook looks nice and small there, right? That's good. But bear in mind that I spend most of my day looking at a computer screen. and even then, I managed to find almost 2.5 hours worth of time to be on my phone. What does that say about my habits, right? But as you look at that screen time report on your device, here's the question I want you just to think about for just a second. What's your hot take? What do you see when you look at that? Maybe just give you a pause, take maybe 32 seconds, turn to somebody near you and say, here's what I'm seeing on my report here. Now, if you're seeing some things that you go, hey, actually I'm doing all right. When I look back a few days, I'm in control of this. I'm handling it pretty well. That's good. That's good. And hang on to that. But if not, maybe this is time to say, all right, what do I need to do to make some changes here? And by the way, you can do this not just on your phone, but it works on your tablets, your computers, and so on. You can find what kind of time you're spending and what you're doing with that time. But I want to talk for just a second about why this matters. Let's just address the why behind this. I mean, to many in the world, we could talk about kind of the sort of utilitarian, right? What's the value of my time, and am I being productive? Am I being efficient, and all of those things? But if I had a worldview that said that at the end of the day, my life is just a blip, and at the end of my life I just go on the ground, then what difference does it make what I do with my time? But we don't have that perspective. And so looking at, for instance, Colossians 3, what does he say here? He says, you've been raised with Christ. He says to set your hearts on things above. And I think there's a way that technology is attempting to capture our hearts, right? All of these portals to all of these things, whether it's entertainment or social media or even our work habits, it's trying to capture our hearts. And Christ wants to own our hearts. Set your minds on things above. In other words, our patterns of thought should be occupied not with the things of this world, but with the things of the eternal kingdom to which we belong. For you died with Christ, your life is now hidden in Christ. In other words, your life does not consist of what you do with your time, but what Christ does through you with your time. And so I want to make sure that I'm not eating up that time with things that aren't pursuing his kingdom. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. We look forward to a glory that is to come that we get to share in, because God, in this mysterious way, chooses to share his glory with us as part of his heavenly plan for us. God, who deserves all glory, says, but I'm still going to glorify you at some point. And so we're made for something bigger, right? Another thought from Scripture is 1 Corinthians 6. Now, Paul is not addressing technology specifically here, but he's giving us a very good general principle about how to approach anything in life, right? If we say, I have the right to do anything, yeah, I have the right to spend as much time as I want to looking at my phone or my computer. But not everything's beneficial. That might not be the most helpful thing to me. I have the right to do anything, but am I being mastered by it? Has it captured me? And am I able to say no, or am I at a point where I don't even know how to say no to these things? And of course, food for the stomach and the stomach for food, but God's going to destroy them both. And here's an interesting question to tool around your mind. Will there be smartphones in heaven? And am I devoting a lot of time to something that ultimately is going to be destroyed when the rest of the earth goes along with it? Okay, so this is why this matters. This is why there are things that we want to pay attention to. So when I look at my own schedule, I want to think a little bit about some of the triggers in my life that do lead me to get attached to, what makes me suddenly go, oh, I'm going to pull this out, right? I mean, okay, now, I've got a device on my wrist too that every time this thing buzzes, okay, that means I got to pull it out and look at it, right? Well, what if I'm having dinner with the family, or we're doing devotion together, or I'm playing a board game with my wife, and is that the time to pull those things out, right? So I got to be aware of triggers, but I also have to be thoughtful about just different things that can capture me. So I might note, maybe it's a day of the week that when I look at my report, maybe I do real well most days of the week, but I get to, Saturday, wow, man, most Saturdays I'm on 9 hours, what's going on there? Or maybe it's Monday. Yeah, I'm looking at my phone. I've got unlocks that go clear on into 11:30 at night. So maybe there's a day of the week that I need to be attentive to and say, what's going on those days that I need to change what I'm thinking? How about the time of day? Maybe I look and go, okay, when am I most actively looking? Hey, if I work 9 to 5 and I'm most active on my phone during the lunch hour, that's probably not a bad thing. I mean, I'm just sitting at work in my break room and I'm looking at my phone, no problem. But if it's, it seems like I'm most active on my phone from the hours of 4:30 to the hour, 7:30, that's when my kids are home. That's when I'm home with my kids. Why am I on my phone so much during that time? Or maybe we recognize that there are specific apps. Maybe you look at that, and as you look and you see a pattern, you say, hey, this app sucks a lot of time out of my life. Maybe that's a time to put a time limit on it. You can do that through those digital well-being or screen time on your phones, the things that we were just looking at there, where you can actually say, I don't want to spend more than 20 minutes on Facebook a day, so I set a limit on it. And then the next time I get to 20 minutes, it closes the app and it says, you've hit your limit. Now you can, of course, override that. It's your phone. But it's just that one little moment of, okay, wait a second. Why am I overriding this? Do I have a really good reason? Another thing to think about might be your mood. What happens when you get into a rotten mood? Maybe your kids are a little bit of a struggle, you're kind of feeling a little cranky, and that's every time you sort of settle in to looking at something. Maybe that's your escape, you're disengaging. So it's good to be aware of all of those different triggers so that you're able to start putting into place some controls on your usage for the sake of your family, for the sake of your kids. Now, one trigger that obviously is very big for people is work, right? We use our devices to enhance our productivity with work, and it's very easy then. People can email us and text us with all kinds of work things onto our phones, and how easy it is to say, I just gotta check this email. I just gotta look at this thing. I just gotta check my schedule and stuff. Well, let's take a look at some advice from another TED Talk here about how to control that.
For so many of us, myself included, our days feel filled with a million small interruptions. And this is true even of our days off. Maybe you've taken a call at the beach, texted your boss from the grocery store, or emailed a colleague while on a picnic with your family. We've convinced ourselves that these behaviors are no big deal. It's just one email. But there's a real cost to these interruptions, and there are smart strategies we can all take to better protect our time. These moments seem so small at the time, and yet research suggests they add up to a tremendous loss. The constant creep of work into our personal lives can increase our stress and undermine our happiness. So just what is the cost? In one study, researchers recruited parents who were visiting a science museum with their kids. Some parents were told to check their phone as much as possible, others were told to check their phone as little as possible. After the visit, parents who used their phones reported that the experience was significantly less meaningful. They also felt much lonelier. In another study, tourists who were asked to have their phones out while visiting an iconic church remembered fewer details a week later. And in my research, employees who were paid for their performance spent increasingly less time interacting with friends and family, and more time interacting with colleagues and clients. These constant interruptions come at a cost to organizations too. Companies lose 32 days of productivity each year to employee depression, which is often caused by the stress and burnout of our always-on culture. Despite knowing better, I too have found myself focusing on urgent work distractions over important life moments. Most recently, I found myself texting a client while in the middle of my first child's first ultrasound. Happy client, guilty mom-to-be. When you add up all of these moments, the sum total is a life shortchanged on meaning, joy, connection, and even memory. As we remake our models of work in the wake of the pandemic, now is our opportunity to create a new culture that respects time. And the way to make this really big change is through small steps that we can take right now. The first step that we need to take is to reframe rest. Reflect for a moment about what you think about when you hear the word rest. Sounds amazing, right? But in my mind, I immediately worry about not being productive enough or letting down my colleagues. When we do have time off, we need to find ways in which we can enjoy the present moment and savor the leisure time that we have available, as opposed to seeing it as an unproductive barrier to our work. One specific strategy we can take is to treat our upcoming weekend like a vacation. On Friday afternoon, jot down how you would act and behave as if you were on a holiday. Maybe you and your partner will buy a bottle of wine and watch online clips of the Eiffel Tower. Maybe you'll visit a local cafe and listen to some live music. Or maybe you'll go for a long walk in the middle of the day with no phone and no agenda. The plan doesn't have to be expensive or extravagant. Another strategy you can take is to create clear boundaries for your time off. Instead of saying, I'm out of the office, feel free to Slack me whenever, say, I'll be offline. Call me only if it's urgent. To uphold these personal goals, work together as a team. Set team goals for personal time. Do it publicly, collect data, and hold each other accountable. These goals could sound like, I will not check email between 6 and 8 p.m., I will have dinner with my family 4 nights a week, or I will go for a jog midday. Check in on your team's progress and see how everyone's doing. If you or your teammates are unsuccessful, work together to help accomplish personal goals. Lastly, you can negotiate for more time to prevent work from creeping into your personal life. In business school, I teach students to negotiate for salary, but realize I spoke almost nothing about negotiating for more time. What does this look like in practice? You can ask for more time on adjustable deadlines at work. If your client asks for a deliverable Monday morning, ask for an extension until Tuesday afternoon so you don't find yourself working on your well-deserved weekend. And don't worry too much about reputation. Quality truly is the metric that matters most. In my data, employees who proactively asked for more time reported lower levels of stress and burnout and were seen as more committed and professional by their colleagues. These are small but powerful changes to not only reframe rest, but to reclaim it. Once you discover the profound impact that these changes can have, you'll feel empowered to demand that others respect and accommodate your approach to time. Maybe they'll even feel inspired to piece together the fractured moments of their lives too.
Now, hopefully you heard something in there that was able to, click for you as, hey, that's something I could work on. There's a spot where I could actually make a change. But the one thing that struck me was that first point she made about reframing rest. If we go back to God's original design for his people's life, 6 days you'll do your work, and then he said, and on the 7th day you will rest. You won't do any work. And I can imagine if the people of Israel had had smartphones, God might have written in Scripture, you will turn off your smartphones and leave them in the cabinet and not look at them during the Sabbath. And maybe that's a good rule for us, is find 24 hours in your week where you say, this thing doesn't have a place in my life. Give yourself a chance to really engage with the people in your life and around you. There might be some other things that you saw in there that are useful as well. But as you approach, okay, what things am I going to do to make some changes here? How am I going to make this easier on myself so that I can stick to it? Here's just a thought. There's a lot of research around the concept of gamifying. The reason why little game apps on phones are so attractive to people is they've learned how to trick the human brain into wanting to come back again and again, right? We click a thing, and when we start the game, the first time you click just a few times and suddenly you get a reward, right? Oh, look at that, you finished the level within just a few clicks. Boom, here's a little reward for you. And then you do another one and you get a little bit more reward. And then after a bit, though, it takes just a few more clicks each time until you get the reward. So you keep going and you keep going and you keep going. And that's how those games become addictive to people. And then they start to sell you things saying, well, you can speed up the process. You get those rewards a little bit faster if you'll just spend a little bit of money. And that's what they're trying to do. But we can actually take that same psychology and turn it to our own use when we're trying to fight this. When we're trying to say, let me put tech in the right place, is to gamify your life. That is, treat the hours of your day the same way that they treat your time on your smartphone when they make these games and apps and so on. And by the way, they don't even just do it with games anymore. It's all kinds of stuff, right? You can get achievements for a productivity app so that when you fulfill a certain obligation, you get, yeah, you did this. What does that mean? It's a little dopamine hit, right? So turn this to your advantage. Maybe set some goals and challenges for yourself. Say, all right, here's how much time I'm going to spend each day without this thing open. I'm going to challenge myself to make sure that I hit that goal every day. Here's the time of day that it's going to be turned off, and every day that I hit that goal, I'm going to mark that and say, you know what, after 9 o'clock, I didn't look at my screens at all. They're all put away, and after 9 o'clock, and I did that on Monday, I did it on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Well, now it's Friday. Here's the challenge. Can I keep that going? But then I can give myself achievements and rewards. Maybe I set up a system. Maybe I set up a chart for myself, and I say, hey, you know what, if I can do this for 12 days in a row, I'm going out for Culver's ice cream. Or if I can do this and it sounds silly, right? It sounds like, what, do I have to treat myself like a child? Well, maybe I do, because somewhere inside me, I still have some of those same compulsions and capacity for addiction. I have to be wise about this. And little tricks like this, just tricking my brain to retrain my brain, can be helpful. Another thought is just to build into my schedule as much screenless fun as possible. Say, I'm going to make sure that 3 days a week I go out and I go to a place where I can go for a hike. Or, 3 days a week we're going to pull out a board game and we're going to play that board game at the table, and we're not doing any screens during that time. We're going to find ways to invest our time in things that really have nothing to do with my screen, so that I'm not sitting and just waiting, allowing myself once again to kind of trick my brain into a better habit so that I feel confident about reclaiming my time. So here's a thought. Take 2 minutes, jot down some ideas from what you've heard so far to reclaim some of your time from tech personally, and then share that with a neighbor. Okay, now you came to this presentation, or you're watching this presentation because you really wanted to know about what to do with your kids, and I've spent the last almost half an hour now badgering you about your tech usage. But I hope that you recognize that the things that you do will rub off on your children, and so it's really important to start with yourself. That's true in most areas of our life, by the way. If we're going to influence our children in a positive way, we have to start with our own behavior and model what we want our kids to see. But there are things that we need to be concerned about when it comes to protecting our children as well. And as I said before, the way that currently our schools, many of our schools in our nation are going, is to put more and more technology in the hands of our children, use more of that technology to deliver instruction. And that's not all bad, because there are some ways in which that has really enhanced certain elements of education. But there are other ways in which it can be challenging for us as parents, as we see our kids more and more used to having a screen in front of their face day in and day out, and coming home. How do we get them kind of to rebalance on this? Let's just start with an interesting statistic here. How much screen time should my kids have? Well, according to brain researchers who have been really looking deeply at this question, right now, what they figure is if you are below the age of 2, you should not have any screen time really at all, except some will say for your babies and toddlers, it's okay if that screen time is engaging with another person, like a FaceTime with grandma or something like that. That could be okay, but even then, very limited chunks of time. But otherwise, no screen time they should have. At 2 to 5, they should have no more than an hour a day. And from age 6 on up, now understanding that there's some flexibility there, but 2 hours a day is about the limit that's healthy for them. Once again, this is a changing target, right? Because as we've got kids in classrooms using screens, they maybe are spending a lot more than 2 hours looking at that. And my own personal opinions on that aside, it just puts us as parents kind of in a place of saying, okay, if my kid just come home from school, if they've had more than 2 hours of screen time already at school, what should my day look like when they get home? What should their day look like when they get home if they've had that much time already? And so when we look at our own patterns at home, I want to ask this simple question: how are your kids doing? How are you doing as far as managing this at home? Now, that's kind of a risky question to ask myself. And I gave you this in your handout as a tool that you could use. And the way to use this tool is not to go home this week and say, all right, we're going to put in some new rules right now, and we're going to fix this today. I went to this presentation, and we've got new rules. You know, your kids will be like, do you have to go to that kind of presentation, Mom? Do you have to watch that kind of thing? It's just messing up my life. But here's where I want you to start, is not changing anything, but just taking this sheet and saying, let's say if we don't change any of the rules of the house and we don't change any of the normal patterns of life, let's just observe. You know, be a scientist. Be like that, who is that naturalist who she went and she spent all that time watching the monkeys? You know who I'm talking about? Jane Goodall, I think it was. And she would spend, she just went to observe and didn't want to be she wouldn't interfere with their life. So, your children are the monkeys, right? And you're Jane, and you're just going to watch, and you're going to observe and write down. Now, I'll say this, that as I was walking through this presentation with my wife the other day, where she gives me great sharpening on things, and she said, well, you know that as soon as you give them this and you tell them this, they are going to change what they do. People are going to change what they do just because they're observing it. It's like quantum physics. As soon as you observe it, it changes. I said, yeah, but I know that. And she goes, well, they know that too. I said, yes, but we're all going to pretend like it's not going to happen, okay? So just pretend like you're not going to make any changes right now and just try to observe. Because what you want to find out is, how have we been doing so that we can make realistic changes? Because here's what happens to too many parents. We get fired up about something, right? We think, this is something I need to change. We make a big change, and that change totally disrupts our normal patterns of life, and we think, yes, I finally got it, and it lasts how long? A few days, a week, maybe a couple of weeks, and then we kind of slide back into our normal patterns. It's better if we can look at it and say, okay, where am I at, and how can I make small adjustments to get to where I want to be? Because if I can make a small adjustment and make it stick, then I can make another small adjustment and make it stick, and eventually, over time, I'll be in a better place. I'll give you a good example of this. If I said, I want to get in better shape, so I'm going to go start running a 3-mile run every morning, but I don't run more than, a block at any point in my life, right? If I'm that kind of person. It might be really hard to make it stick to run 3 miles. But there's a thing called the 1% rule. So let's say instead I walk out the door and I say I'm going to walk a block, and then for a week, and then the next week I'm going to walk 2 blocks. And then the next week I'm going to walk 3. Am I adding a ton? No. But if every week I add a little bit more distance, I'm not increasing a whole lot. It's not a huge commitment. But eventually, I'm going to get to the point where I'm able to move my body 3 miles every day without any problems. So take this as your start, and then start looking at your 1%. What small incremental changes can we make to help our kids be a little more balanced right now when it comes to our screen time? I want to share with you just how we've done this in our home. The Steenbach house has some guidelines for how we keep balance with screen time. And you're free to use some of these for yourself, or say, no, that doesn't work for our family, but we'll maybe adapt and come up with some other ideas. So one is that on school nights, we just don't have any screen time. So Monday through Thursday, our kids don't pull out computers and screens and iPads, except for now, with the digital learning stuff, we have to be flexible about homework. But entertainment, social media, games and movies and stuff, we don't even watch it. Okay, so we don't turn on the television on school nights to watch shows. It's just not a part of the DNA of our home. On the weekends, they're permitted about 2 hours a day. The only exception to that is that if we say, hey, we're going to watch a movie as a family, we're going to go out to a movie or we're going to watch something, that does not count towards that 2 hours a day. We're free to, but because we're parents, we make that decision for our kids. We're deciding that we're going to spend time on the couch with a bowl of popcorn, and we don't want to sacrifice that time with them, for their video game entertainment and so on. Now during the summer, unlimited. That's why my boys really look forward to summer. But there's a big caveat there because they have a daily checklist. I'm going to talk about that in just a few minutes. But they have to get through an entire checklist before they have access to their screens. And I've intentionally designed the checklist so that it's actually limiting the number of hours in which they could use screens, because to get through the checklist takes a significant portion of the day. We'll talk about that more. We also have a guideline about transparency. We don't allow screens to be in the bedrooms. No computers, laptops, phones, tablets, any of that stuff. We don't have TVs in the bedrooms. Part of that is a safety thing. If my child is in their bedroom alone with a screen, they're being exposed to a lot of stuff that it's harder to control. And there's a sense of secrecy and privacy, and problems with our screens thrive on secrecy and privacy. Openness and transparency helps us to stay clean. But on top of that, it just simply is a good practice for keeping those things from ruling our lives, because you have a sanctuary in the house. There are places in the house where this just isn't part of what we spend time with. Filtering. We also fight some of that garbage, and we're going to talk more about that stuff in a little while, but we fight some of that stuff through various methods. One included is our circle device. I'll talk a little bit about that later on. But it monitors, it filters out junk, it allows me to control which apps are usable and which ones aren't. And so it gives us a measure of security for our home network. And then finally, accountability. Because I know that with teenage boys, there are things they could be accessing online that are not good for them and not good for people around them. And so I want to make sure that it's okay that what they're doing, what they're spending their time on, is okay with me. And the communication they have with their friends, the things that their friends are sending them. I want all of that stuff to be safe. And so we kind of have a thing in our house where they know that if I say, hey, let me see your phone, the answer is not why, but here you go. And at any point, it can be, set your phone on the table, let me see what it is. Now, that may sound like I don't trust my kids. But it's really not about that, and they know it's not about that because we've talked about this. It's a culture of openness, and it's for their good, and they know that it's for their good. And there's actually plenty of research on this that says that kids whose parents do set those limits actually appreciate those limits. And kids who don't have those limits recognize that their parents aren't paying enough attention. They see the problem with that. Okay, so I can pull up their usage report at any time. This also holds them accountable and says, you know what, I'm not going to spend my time looking at garbage because dad could see that. So why do it, right? So those are simple guidelines in our house. That's how we approach this. And it has helped our boys grow up to see this stuff in some amount of balance. Now, is it a perfect balance? No. If I could tell you how many times I think to myself, my 15-year-old, he's looking at Reddit again, just get off of that junk, man. Stop looking at memes for how long. But it's a battle, and this is part of how we're fighting it. I mentioned the checklist, the summer checklist. And I provided you a sample of this kind of thing. Now, this is not the one that we use, but this is a sample for you. And this would be maybe one way that you'd approach setting up a checklist before allowing screen time. You know, you see the various kind of activities during the day. This one's more attractive, which is why I put it in there, because my checklist for my kids is on a little whiteboard, and they've just got to check the box, and it doesn't look cute because I don't do cute. But you see some of the things that we've got in there. Okay, I mean, they've got to make their bed and tidy their room to start with. They've got to be dressed. You don't get to spend time on a screen if you're in your pajamas. You've got to eat your breakfast. I'm not going to be okay if I find you on your screen at 11 a.m. and you still haven't eaten yet, because especially for a teenage boy, I know that hangry is a real thing. You need to read for an hour. Spend an hour in a book. You need to write for 30 minutes. Actually, we discovered that teenage boys can be really good. Maybe girls can too, I don't know, but because I don't raise girls. But teenage boys are really good at finding ways to make a 30 minutes of writing completely useless if they don't feel like doing anything. You know, the same sentence over and over and over again, the same gobbledygook or whatever. So we also had to sort of institute some other benchmarks, either 30 minutes or this amount of content, just to make sure that it was worth their time. They have to exercise for 30 minutes. Do something with your body to keep it healthy. And on top of that, they need some time outside, and the exercise and the time outside cannot overlap with each other. I mean, it can be outside exercise, but that 30 minutes of exercise, if it's running outside, doesn't count towards an hour outside. You see what I've done with this, right? I've added all of these time limits that force it to be hours into their day before screen time is available. They got to play a board game. And we have some board games that are single player, some that are two players, so they'll play together, some that are larger, so they can wait until we're available and play a board game with us. They got to study their language for 20 minutes. They've got to practice a skill, whether that's our younger son who's a musician, practice his cello or whatever, or our older son who is got a variety of different things that he is working on skill-wise. But as a swimmer, you know, have him be like, okay, you got to go out and you got to do some dry land training kind of stuff for 20 minutes, something like that. And they got to finish all their chores. All of this has to be done before screen time. So that when I say unlimited, well, it might be 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon before they're going to get access to that. Factor in also things like you got to stop and have lunch. You got to stop and have supper together. And the screens have to be off by 8 o'clock at night. So you see what I'm doing, though, is I'm not limiting their time by telling them, here's how much you get, but instead I'm saying, hey, you can have it. If you're diligent, you do the things that I ask you to do, it's up to you. And they're learning to prioritize. They're learning that there are other things that have to happen before I invest in the screens, and that's going to pay off in dividends in their life down the road. Okay, I'm going to give you guys a break there. We're going to take a 4.5 minute break here to stretch, grab a cappuccino if you need to from the Soul Cafe, and then we'll come back and start talking about rules around social media and other such stuff. Let's have a conversation about social media. Let's start with kind of a balanced perspective here.
So much of parents' fear around social media use comes from this fear that their kids' lives will be ruined forever. And we see that a lot of times online where people make poor decisions and then their lives are affected in pretty dramatic ways. But I think it's important to step back with kids and help them understand, how can you be more intentional about how you're spending your time online, and how can you align those with your values? The smartphone was only really released about 10 or 12 years ago. So all these apps are new for parents as well. Kids are going through some treacherous terrain when it comes to technology and social media use. But we also need to understand that they're using technology for some positive things, learning, understanding, communicating. So when we do that, we become more open to helping kids in an objective way that protects them from some of the detrimental, draining, and dangerous things that may happen online or in real life. So where do I start? What do I do? The first is this idea of developing awareness. Learn what apps your kids are using, learn how to use them, download them on your phone, and then you can come from a framework that's more objective rather than coming from a place of fear and telling kids they can never use something. The second thing is creating opportunities for daily and weekly digital detox. Taking kids' phones and devices away at night can be a really easy way to do this. And a lot of times kids will tell me, I don't want to tell my parents this, but I'm really grateful that they take my phone away at night, because then I can tell my friends I'm not available after a certain hour. Otherwise, it becomes this feeling of always online, always having to react. And kids don't want that either, but they don't really know how to effectively self-regulate. And the third thing is helping kids figure out their why. Why you're reaching for your phone, or why you're posting, or why you're taking so many photos when you're with friends. The idea is really to help kids identify and understand what is energizing for them and what is draining. They have a choice in how they spend their time online. They can opt into experiences and opt out. And that's a really empowering message. And once they're given permission and understanding that they have choices, they actually start making really good ones that are in line with their own personal values.
So the idea here is that social media is not necessarily all bad, even if we know it's not all good, right? And a great example of the positive side of social media is my kids have the opportunity to communicate with their friends, sometimes that they maybe didn't get a chance to see at school, or maybe they want to arrange something for a weekend. Later today, my younger son, who likes to play role-playing games, kind of those tabletop role-playing games, with dice and all that fun stuff, with his buddies, and they managed to arrange all of this because he has a Discord account, and they've got a little Discord chat room for the group of them, and it's just them. It's just a handful of these boys who are just in this thing, and they can chat with each other while they're on the weekend playing a video game or whatever. They can talk with each other. It's sort of like having shoulder-to-shoulder time. And while they were doing that, they said, well, why don't we get together this weekend and play our game? And so now a bunch of these guys are going to come over to our house this afternoon for nachos, and that's a good thing. Or my son, who likes to get together with his buddies and go fishing, has different ways that he can communicate with his guys about fishing, and then they can share pictures with each other of the things that they caught, and the guys who aren't there can see that, and oh, wow, that's a great catch, or oh, that's a terrible catch, or don't put a hook in your eye, kind of stuff like that, and they can enjoy the time with each other. They feel connected to one another. And even to a certain extent, my kids now are learning how they can use those apps to connect with their grandparents and communicating with family members that I want them to have a relationship with that otherwise they would only have if they were able to be face-to-face, which they're not always. So it's not all bad, but it's also not all good, right? I remember hearing a story once of a kid who had something embarrassing happen to him at school, and he didn't think too much of it. It was a little bit embarrassing in the moment, but he thought, well, that's okay. Until later on when he was on the bus and realized some people were looking at a phone and laughing and giggling and glancing his way, and he pulled out and he saw that somebody had taken a video of it and posted it online, and so now the embarrassment piled up for him. And over the course of the afternoon and evening, he just kept seeing how many views were clocking up on this embarrassing thing that involved himself. And so he dreaded going to school the next day because he knew he was going to have to face this all over again. Whereas if we think back to our own experience as children, if something embarrassing happened to us, maybe the story would spread, most people would go out, whatever, and by the time the next day happened, everybody's thinking about something else. And I'm not anxious about it because it wasn't something that I had to stew on all night long. And so there's some downsides there. And then, of course, there's the downside, right, of, well, who am I, oh, that's the next slide. Who am I giving access to? We'll talk about that in a minute. But how is this exposing my child to the dangers online? So all of that, people have said, what is the minimum age for social media? 13 is the absolute minimum age at which your child should be on social media and using things that allow people access to them personally. Now, if you're saying, okay, wait a second, I've got a child who's younger than that, and they've already got an account on TikTok or on Snapchat or on whatever. And the answer to that is maybe you have to have some hard conversations. Maybe you have to sit down and talk about what we're going to do about that. But it might be better for their mental and emotional health for you to be a little bit mean and remove that from their life for a time for their own good, or to negotiate some kind of a middle ground where you can work on it together. One of the biggest questions with this, though, is, as I said, is asking, who am I giving access to? Who am I allowing to access my children through these things? Because I can control my child's behavior and I can control my behavior, but I cannot control the behavior of every single, I mean online, by the way. I can't control my child's behavior and everything. I can't control who is out there who wants to get at my child, so I have to control what doorways they have to get there. If I knew that my house was in the middle of a neighborhood full of child predators, what would I do with my windows and doors to make sure my children are safe? Social media is a neighborhood filled with child predators, and I want to make sure that those windows and doors are kept well secured for their safety, right? And of course, it's a neighborhood also filled with people who will love my child, people who will support my child, people who I want my child to know, family and friends that mean a lot to me. So I want to make sure that those windows and doors can be open to those people, but not to people I don't want to see. So this is my personal philosophy with this. I want to limit the ability of people to know my children as children outside of my supervision. In other words, I have to be the one who says, this is how you know that my child is a child. If my child's going to have an account on anything, as long as they're still a child, I have to have control over that account so that I know who knows them. So, for example, I can post a picture of my child on my Facebook page without too much concern because I know who is able to see my Facebook photos. I control the privacy settings and who's allowed to be friends with me and whether or not anybody who's not my friend gets to see my photos and which ones they get to see. I have control over those things. And despite the fact that you hear a lot in the news about Facebook's privacy things, and there maybe are some legitimate concerns, they actually are trying very hard to make privacy a high priority. So I can control that. If I decide, you know what, my kids want to do TikTok, and so we've got a family here at St. Mark who's really great at this, by the way. Their whole family has a TikTok account. That's their only TikTok account, and they do family TikTok videos like every week. And they're hilarious. It's fun to watch. It's awesome stuff. But you see what they're doing? The parents are saying, you want to be on TikTok? Great, let's be on it together. It's my account. I control who can see what goes on our TikTok thing. And so when somebody sees a video of my children, I'm in control of that. But I don't want my children then to have a social media account disattached from me entirely, where I can't control who they're talking to, who's friending them, whether or not they're friends with them, and so on. So some common sense rules, and this, by the way, might be common sense to me, but maybe doesn't seem like common sense to you. Maybe you say, you know what, my own common sense rules are going to be a little bit different than yours, Brandon, but that's okay with me. But let me share with you mine. First of all, no smartphones before 8th grade. The way that we handled this was we basically said, look, okay, if you absolutely need to have a phone so that we can communicate with you about logistics, so I can call you or you can text me if you need a ride or anything like that, we'll get you a dumb phone. There are some great options out there, by the way. There are some right now that you can buy that only do phone and text, but they have a touch screen and everything so they can text easily. Feels like a smartphone, but it's only got those couple of functions on it. And my kid could call me from that, and that's all he needs, right? Even if he wants to text with a couple of buddies, that's okay, but he doesn't need access to all of the social media apps and so on. Now, after 8th grade, we decided that we're still not providing a smartphone. We don't need to pay for it. If you want a smartphone, you're going to have to pay for it because that financial investment makes them take a little bit more ownership. But I'm not paying for a data plan. And the interesting thing is, as soon as I showed my son when he first got his smartphone, he bought it himself, and it's not very fancy. But he said, well, what if I wanted to get a data plan on it? I said, well, you'd be paying for it. He said, well, what would that cost? And I showed him what it would cost, and he said, oh man, that's not worth it. I'm saving up for a car. So he understood that once the ball was in his court, because smartphones have Wi-Fi. But see, there's a great thing, right? Because now where can he use the Wi-Fi? In my house, where I have control. At school, where they have filtering devices and controls set on things. At Grandma's house, where, anything goes, unfortunately. But, we talk about that, yeah. Okay, no social media apps without my permission. This is where that transparency that I talked about before, that accountability, where I can look at his phone at any time, I can look and say, hey, so since when did you get Snapchat, right? You didn't ask for that. Please delete that right now, right? We can talk about it again later on if you really think you need it, but you need to ask permission for this. Because as long as my child's still under the age of 18, I still get to make the rules, right? If he's going to be on a social media platform, he's got to be friends with me. I get to know what he's posting about, and I get to know who he's friends with. And, I get to be the one who makes all the dorky comments on his stuff so that he goes, oh my gosh, it's not even worth posting on Facebook anymore. My dad is so embarrassing. Mission accomplished. And I have account access to all his social media. Okay, in other words, when he says, I'm going to set up an account on Reddit, okay, well, what's your username and password? I got to know that I can log into it if I want to so I can see what kind of activity you're up to and what you've subscribed to and so on. And once again, all of this sounds like, oh man, don't you trust your kids? Yeah, I trust them a lot. And they make really good choices. But they make those good choices under the culture and context of a dad who says, I care enough to pay attention to what you're doing. Because there are a lot of kids out there who are saying, my dad doesn't care. And they mean that in both ways. And it hurts, right? So my kids develop the ability to be trustworthy when they say, well, dad is helping me with that by making sure that I'm not left unaccountable to him. Okay, a few other things here with this is that this is a guideline for me, I have to resist the urge to control. In other words, I might look at this and I might say, I look at what he posts and say, well, that's a dumb thing to post. Why did you post that? Well, you know what? If it's not wrong, if it's not sinful and it's not unwise, it may just be typical teenage behavior. I have to be willing to say, hey man, if you want to embarrass yourself in front of your friends, that's your problem, right? I have to embrace the urge to guide, though, and say, hey, let's talk, and let's talk often. I want to guide my children. You want to guide your children. Sometimes we feel an urge to say something and we go, oh, but if I do, will they, I don't know, well, if you make this part of the culture of your home, you're constantly talking about meaningful things with your children, eventually it becomes more comfortable for all of you. So embrace that. And I need to be fiercely protective of my child's privacy. Okay? That's a non-negotiable, that it's really important to me to know that they're kept secure from kind of an outside world that wants to exploit them because they're young. Kind of put on the Papa Bear mentality and say, no, these are my children, you don't have access. If you're a creep, you don't get to know who they are and what's going on in their lives. There's a great website for this called protectyoungeyes.com. There's a lot of good information on there, and they've got just a ton of tools as well. Worth checking out. They've got one page called What's the Right Age for Social Media. I've got a link there, and I think that it's definitely worth your time to go and check out this particular website. They have some specific tools, including a phone that you can buy through them that's designed for kids. It's actually got all kinds of cool parental controls. It's got its own user interface that kind of restricts what can and can't be done. You have choices and tools and so on. And it delays the whole smartphone thing. So earlier when I was talking about a dumb phone, it feels like a smartphone without actually being a smartphone. And then there's this app called Bark. We've just started experimenting with this as a family, but it allows you to monitor all of the activity on social media accounts, text messages, photos, and so on that are getting sent to and from your child's phone. You have access to that from your phone. And you can shut down those things if you feel concerned about something. There are several other apps like this, but Bark is kind of rising as a leader in this right now. I'm pretty impressed with some of the things that they're doing. Along with social media, we got to just have a conversation about pornography and its presence online. Because this is also one of the things that we need to be very cautious about with our kids. Recognizing that, historically speaking, the majority of internet advancements were designed by people who were looking for ways to monetize it, especially within the sex industry. Things like streaming video and stuff like that were actually developed by people who were hoping to be able to use it for this. So it's a concern that's been turned by some people into good things, but also still a reason for us to be very on guard because so much of our technology is driven by this. And maybe you understand the problem. You say, yeah, no, I don't want my kids to see that stuff at all. But a lot of times I think the reason that we don't pay as close of attention to this as we need to, many parents don't pay close enough attention to this, is because they know it's bad. Maybe they don't see what really the deep effects are. So I just want to cover a few of those very briefly here. Talk a little bit about how it affects our brains. And first of all, understanding that our brains are not set in stone, right? Our brains change. They call that plasticity. But when you engage in a certain behavior over and over and over again, your brain accustoms itself to engaging in that behavior more, right? That's how habits are formed. And so when people get involved in looking at pornography, it actually changes the wiring of their brain to say, this is the way that I seek out this particular feeling that I'm looking for. It also then acts like a drug. There's this reward center. There's dopamine that gets flooded into the brain, and the body says, that feels good. That makes me feel good. Okay, so there's a reward to it in my brain, which leads to this addictive quality. One of the things right about addiction too is that it has to escalate. Drug users can't just use the same amount of drug over and over and over again and have it affect them the same way. They start to tolerate it. The same thing happens when we go looking for a dopamine rush through something online. It increases our tolerance to that dopamine. We need more of it to get the same rush. And so it continually has to escalate, which has an impact on our sexual interests. We start to change what we're looking for, and they've studied this, and people always have to find more and more extreme stuff online in order to get the same feelings, the same hits. And so it changes what is interesting to them. They've also done studies and found that this has an effect on our ability to focus and our ability to make judgments. They did an experiment once where they had 3 groups taking a cognitive test, and as they were going through the cognitive test, every several seconds, 2 of the groups were shown a picture where one was shown no picture. Now in one group, they were shown a picture of something like a bird or a landscape or a car or whatever, and in the other they were shown a pornographic image. And here's what they discovered, that the people who had no image and the people who had the mundane image performed pretty close to the same. The people who were shown the pornographic image performed significantly worse. So just by being shown those images, their brain's ability to focus changed. So it affects our way of thinking. But it also affects our hearts. There's a group called Fight the New Drug that one of their slogans is that porn kills love. And that's really based actually on, they've got a ton of research that shows that people who regularly are viewing this stuff find it hard to actually legitimately care about people. And relationships, romantic relationships, tend to fall apart very quickly when people are addicted to this, right? Because it's difficult to continually love somebody when you're viewing people as objects. It affects sexual satisfaction. I've had conversations with guys who are struggling with this, who will say it's the novelty. I just can't be okay with just one thing. I have to find more and more and more. And that can affect your relationships down the road. When our kids get into this early on, that's setting them up for failure in relationships down the road. And that leads to loneliness, a deep sense of loneliness. People who view this stuff regularly will say they just feel a deep sense of being alone because they're thriving on a world of privacy that's not real, right? I do this on my own, and there's nothing real about it. I'm not actually connecting to a human being. They're seeking connection and not finding it. But it also has effects on the world, on society. The objectifying of people is an issue, right? And when I start to see people only as objects, I only look at them as what can they do for me? Well, how can they please me? That's harmful. I don't want my children to see people as objects. I want them to see people as people, worthy of respect and dignity and love, right? But we can't ignore the fact that also the porn industry is inextricably linked to the sex trafficking trade. The two have deep connections to each other. And there's more and more stories, by the way, and we're starting to see this as various celebrities are coming forward and saying, this happened to me, right? There's violence attached with that it leads to people escalating their behaviors into outward behaviors towards other people, which leads to more and more violence in the world around the sex trafficking trade, as well as just people's own inability to show kindness and love and care and concern to another human being. It warps our views as a society, and it does harm to families. So it's serious stuff, and I want to just show you a video now of a young woman, and don't worry, it's fairly She doesn't get into anything graphic or anything like that, but she just tells her story about how she got swept up into this and then also how she decided to get out of it.
My name is Cruz. I am from LA. I'm a SoCal girl, definitely through and through. I get cold once it hits like 70 degrees. So I'm coming to Oregon because my fiance lives up here. So this is Ryan, my fiance.
Hello.
And we're getting married in January. I'm so excited for that. I love yellow. I have a yellow sweater, yellow nails, yellow pillows. I have yellow cuffs here, there. These count. These are yellow. I have yellow soap. So I started looking at porn because I was really curious about the human body, and I was probably watching every other night, if not every night. One of the ways that it changed me was in how I view men. It changed the way in which I relate to people. I thought I was satisfying some desire. Afterwards, I would just feel empty, just nothing. Porn made me think that being in a relationship with someone meant all there is physical intimacy. Just a go kind of mentality and like, get what you want, get it now, and that's it. I felt that no woman had the same struggle that I did, and everyone had normal women problems. I kind of just started diving into things that were more hardcore. It got to the point where I went into trying to find random chat rooms. There was a moment in which I was asked to meet up with someone and they gave me their address. And I don't know, everything kind of came to a screeching halt in my brain, and I realized the mere idea that I was tempted to meet someone was like, I can't do this. This is too much. This has gone too far. I almost did something that was potentially dangerous and life-threatening. My happiness level now is, I don't even know how to put it into words. Like, it's just so much better than it was. It was really hard to walk away. When I was in my darkest moments, I didn't think I could get better, but it is through opening up and having those real life relationships that have shown me that there's so much more to life than just what's on a screen. I really don't want to go back to where I was before, because going back to that place where I was before means I have to forfeit all the relationships that I have now. And because I have that to fight for, I don't want to go back because they're so much better. They're the best.
So the first key to protecting our children from pornography actually is making sure it's not a thing in our own lives. And I think that, I'm just going to say this, that we have this kind of idea that this is a guy problem, and part of the reason I showed a video of a woman who struggled with it is just to recognize that it's not a guy problem, it's a person problem, right? And women often can get sucked into it, girls can get sucked into it as well, and I just want to make that clear, partly so that if you're, if you've struggled with this and you're saying, well, I don't necessarily fit the kind of the cultural expectation of this, well, that's not your fault, that the culture maybe doesn't understand. But it's also something we have to address in our own lives. So, first step, repent, turn away, stop looking at it, stop following it, stop pursuing it. And I'm going to say this, I've never known somebody who actually got free of this who didn't do so in the context of a community, who didn't have somebody helping them through it. It is a struggle that relies on other people to support you through it. So if you're watching this and you're thinking, okay, yes, I need to get free of this, find somebody in your life that you can communicate with, that can hold you accountable. You can be part of a community who is helping you get free. But if we are not free of it ourselves, if we're not able to step away from this, then it's going to be hard for us to keep our children safe from it, right? We're giving our children access to it through the back door, and that's not going to help them. Another way that's going to help our children avoid getting trapped by this is a thing I call the 90-second conversation. And this has been my method with my boys, and it has worked really well over the course of their lives. Because the thing is that your child isn't going to go, like the first day they get access to the internet, go to the most hardcore pornography site they can and open it up and start watching. What's going to happen is by little things, they're going to get exposed to little stuff over the course of time and get curious and go after more. And so if you can find out when it first happens, this is what's happened, then you can start to help them avoid it. So those 90-second conversations, here's how that looks. I say to my son, hey, bud, how's this been going? Have you seen anything online, any pornography lately? Have you looked at anything lately? He might say, well, no, Dad. Okay, has a friend shown you anything? No. All right, but you know you would tell me if you would, right? Because you know that we'll talk about it. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay, have you been worried about anything, or have you been curious about anything? Well, actually, I have been kind of curious about this, Dad. I have a question. And then I give a really short answer, and then I go, hey, you know what? Let's play a video game together later. Which game would you like to play? And we change the topic, right? So 90 seconds, I talk with them I bring up the question, we talk about it, I let them ask a question, and then we move on. I change the topic before it gets so uncomfortable for him that he doesn't want to hear where this is going any longer. Because, we all dreaded, like when we were kids, we dreaded when our parents would give us the talk, right? Like, that's really uncomfortable, right? But we don't have to do that. I remember when my child was really small and I asked him, do you know what sex is? And he said, no. And I said, would you like to know? And he said, sure. And I explained it in very basic terms, and his response was, you had to do that? Yes. And then we moved on, and we changed the topic, and we went to another thing. And by creating a culture of that kind of openness and communication, now when my son has something that comes up in his mind, he asks. He just asks. He says, hey, Dad, what does this mean? Whoa, where'd you hear that? Oh, somebody was talking about it at school. All right, let's talk about that. But then, once again, 90-second conversation. So some guidelines I have for myself for those 90-second conversations. Keep it age appropriate, okay? We're not going to talk about things and terms and ideas that my child can't handle. He doesn't need to know all of the details of everything. He just needs to know the basic things that are going to help him say, okay, this is where to place this in my life for now. Clear and direct. I don't try to euphemize or talk around things or come up with ways to say like, let's analogize it. No, I'm just going to tell it like it is, because I don't want his curiosity to make him go, wait a second, what did Dad mean by that? And what is it? Birds and bees and what? What does that have to do with this? Right? Let's just be clear and direct. But I keep it Christ-centered. I remind them always that really the whole purpose of this aspect of your life, your sexuality, was designed to be used within marriage to picture the gospel. It's not about you, it's about Christ's glory, and it's about the good of his kingdom and the good of your family, and let's keep it in that context so we talk about it under the umbrella of gospel. And I also talk sex positive, okay? So this is really important because when I was growing up, and maybe you heard this too, all I ever heard from most Christians in my life was don't. And I also heard, hey, if you've got urges, just go to the Bible and read Scripture, as though somehow, if I'm more spiritual, I'm going to have fewer sexual urges. That doesn't actually work. Instead, say, God designed this as a beautiful thing. It's intended to be beautiful. Here's why pornography is a problem. It actually cheapens and imitates in a false way, in a perverted way, what it's actually supposed to be about. Okay? It destroys the image of what God was intending this to be that's good. So let's talk about what's good with our kids so they understand that there is a positive aspect to this. I avoid shame. If my child has feelings of shame about this, maybe they have seen something, maybe they've been shown something by a friend, I need to not shame them for that, because shame leads us to say, now I feel less about myself, and when I feel less about myself, I say, well, I can't get any worse, and so I might as well just go and do that. There's a whole cycle to this for people who are addicted to pornography where they feel ashamed because of their use, and they say, well, I'm already dirty, I'm already broken, I'm already flawed, so I might as well keep looking at it because I can't get any worse. And at least I've got something. And so it's a cycle. So if I avoid that shame, if I can avoid that cycle, and I can help my child see, hey, you know what? There's a lot of people struggling with this. If you're struggling, you're not the only one. Let's talk about how to stay secure in my ability to walk forward from this. And then transparent. I just want my kids to say, I can be open with you about this, Dad, and I'm going to be open with them. I'm not going to tell them all of my stuff, but I'm going to say, hey, you know what? I get it. It's a struggle. Other people struggle. What are you struggling with? Let's talk about that. Let's not keep things in the dark. But the beauty of the 90-second conversation is that it keeps this in the light, because you can do this a lot, right? 90 seconds isn't hard. You can do it often. You can have a lot of conversations about it. You can do it frequently. And that keeps it in the light, because sexual sin thrives in the dark. And it dies in the light. Let's keep shining a light on it, all right? Another thing that's a great tool for this, of course, is that your family is constantly in devotion and prayer. We'll talk a lot more about that next week if you come to next week's seminar, or you watch the Building a Spirit-Filled Home one down the road here. Devotion and prayer as part of the DNA of your home is really inviting the Holy Spirit's power to fight with you against the intrusion of sin into your family life. Galatians 5, just a couple of thoughts here. Paul writes that it's for freedom that Christ has set us free. So stand firm and don't let ourselves be burdened by a yoke of slavery. We're called to be free, but we don't use our freedom to indulge the flesh. We use it to serve one another humbly in love. For the law is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. Pornography is the antithesis of all of this, right? Pornography is slavery and a lack of love. We don't want our children to fall under that slavery. So let's make this a fight. Here are some tools for you. The circle device. I mentioned this way earlier in the presentation. So we use this in our home. This is actually created by Disney, and it's a fantastic tool. It's a little box. You buy it. You set it up in your home. It connects to your Wi-Fi router. You have to go through a few setup steps on an app, put your kids into it, assign their devices to it, and then it filters based on your filtering preferences. So you can do some preset ones, like, well, my child is, age 6, so there's a preset for kids kind of in that 6 to 8 range or whatever. My kid is a preteen, my kid is a teen, my kid is a high schooler, different levels that you can set them to. But then you can also go in and you can fine-tune each of those and say, well, okay, but I'm not going to allow this app, I'm not going to allow that app, I'm going to filter these things, I'm going to allow this thing. You can get real granular with some of those settings. You can set times You can say, okay, I only want my child to have access for 2 hours a day, and then they're done. Their internet shuts off. If I'm afraid of something, I can pull out my app, I can hit the pause button, and they can stop. I can also then look at their usage and say, okay, what have they been looking at? And I can also look at what has been filtered away. If maybe I see, every day my son has 200 adult websites getting filtered. Now, I know that ads sometimes come in and sometimes they come from adult sites, and so once in a while there might be there were 3 filters on adult sites. Well, he probably just clicked the wrong thing or an ad came through. But if every day there's a ton of this, I start to scratch my chin and say, maybe he's doing something. Let's talk, let's take a look, right? So I can start looking at those things. And I can even set it up to give me notifications when that happens. For a little bit of an extra fee, so that's all free functions once you've purchased it. Costs about $100 or less when they do sales. But I can also get a subscription that allows me to put an app on their phone that then does all the same functions right on their phone. So when they're out of the house, they don't have to be connected to my Wi-Fi, because this only works while they're on my Wi-Fi. But it's a great tool, very useful, very helpful for keeping our home secure. I like to think of it this way, that if you imagine your home, going back to that analogy, right? If I knew there were people all over the place who wanted to get in my house, how would I secure my home? Well, I can secure my home at various places, right? I'm going to lock the doors and windows. But maybe I'm also going to put a fence and a gate that can be locked, right? But then I might also want to have inside the house a security system so that if somebody tries to get into the house, I also have ways. So devices like this provide multiple layers like that. I have a security system. The monitoring is my security system. If something happens, it flags. I also have a locked door. That's the filtering side of it, right? I might add a gate to it so that I might have a second device that also prevents other stuff from coming into my Wi-Fi router. I've got a Wi-Fi router that has a filtering on it too, so there's 2 different gates. But here's maybe another security system. This one is called Covenant Eyes. For a monthly fee of about, I think it's maybe $8 or $10 or something like that, you can install their app on all devices that belong to you. And the app, not only does it filter, but it also sends reports daily to somebody who, you set it up, you say it's going to send it to me, or maybe it's to my spouse or whatever. If you're struggling with pornography, it's a great thing to get somebody else and have them be your person that it sends a report on your usage to them. It'll take screenshots of things you do about every so often during the day, so a person gets a report with about 20 or so screenshots. And they can scroll through and say, yep, looks clean. I see a word processor. I see a little bit of Facebook use. I see some, watching something on Netflix. All good. Or they can say, that one looks, and it, by the way, if you're an accountability partner for somebody, it actually blurs the ones that it's concerned about. It says, this is one we're concerned about, but you can see from this blurry image that there might be a reason to be concerned. And you go, yeah, it sure does look like that. And then I can reach out to my friend and say, hey, what's going on? I can do the same as a parent. I can say, hey, buddy, I was looking at what you were looking at on your phone, and I see some images that make me concerned. So there's my security system. Covenant Eyes, useful tool. This is more of a philosophical tool, but this one is simply to say, I'm going to rep the movement. I'm going to say, you know what, we're going to fight against pornography as a family by saying we're going to invest our time and energy in fighting against it actively. Now that might mean something as simple as I buy a t-shirt and a bumper sticker and I go out and I say, yeah, I wear a t-shirt that says porn kills love, and somebody walks up to me and goes, what are you wearing? Let me tell you about it. Or I might put a bumper sticker on that says the same thing, or says, fight the new drug or something like that. What is that about? Let me tell you. Or I might reshare articles on my Facebook because I say, hey guys, my friends, if you're struggling with this matters. Because here's the thing that I've discovered with a lot of people that I've worked with who are struggling to get out of porn, is that as soon as they start saying, I'm going to fight in the movement, they start to go, you know what? It doesn't even appeal anymore because they see how evil it is. I'm fighting against it because I care about helping others get free. How could I fall back into that? That doesn't work. That's a cognitive dissonance that I can't live with. And so it actually puts you in a positive, on the attack, to get free of it. And when you make that part of the culture of your home too, then your kids will grow up saying, yeah, this is something we know exists. We're not surprised by it. We're ready to fight it. All right, last thing on this point is creating a culture of grace. I told my kids when they were pretty small, and I keep telling them over and over and over again this: if you ever look at something you shouldn't look at, you ever do something online you shouldn't have done, and you tell me about it, I will not punish you. I will not yell at you. I will not shame you. Christ has already paid the punishment for your sin. Christ has already set you free. Christ is already in your corner. So am I. I will help you. I'll love you through it. I will not make you suffer for this. And I say that because I don't want them to not tell me something because they're afraid of how I'll react. Right? This stuff thrives on secrecy. I need them to be willing to open up. And kids, when they're afraid of punishment, tend not to say what's going on, right? Now, I might, for other things, if they sneak video game time when they're not supposed to, man, you're getting in trouble, kid. But with this is something that I want them to be as open as they can be about it. But creating a culture of grace does another thing, and this really has to do with the whole of our use of technology in our homes. When I create a culture of grace where it's clear that the gospel is the foundation of my home, I'm reinforcing to my children there's something bigger than what the online world has to offer. And when I've communicated that, and then when I create a culture in my home that says we're not going to let technology rule our lives, we're going to use it for good purposes, but we're going to put it in its proper place, my kids grow up saying, you know what? There's a lot of things that I can get sucked into on that. But look at my dad. Look at my mom. Look at what they do with their time. I want to be like that person. It's kind of funny because just last night I was working on something else, and my son says, he's sitting next to me, he says, I love you, Dad. I said, well, what made you say that, buddy? And he goes, I don't know. He goes, you work really hard. I said, okay. What is that, connect the dots here for me, bud. And he goes, well, I just am really glad you're my dad because you support us and you just work hard. And I want to work hard too, okay? My 13-year-old, he talks like this, okay? It's just like, I'm not embellishing, honestly. And I said, okay, well, that's cool. And he goes, but it also makes me sad for you. I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, you're just always working. I said, well, okay. I took that a little bit to heart, right? Oh, man, that hurts a little. That cuts a little. And he said, Dad, I just want you to have fun and enjoy life. Now, where did that come from? I think it came from creating a culture that says there's a bigger picture to the world than the stuff we do with our time, right? That there's something more important in his mind. He knows it because we've created a culture that says grace matters. He was trying to communicate that to me. So let's create that culture in our homes. There's so much we could talk about when it comes to harnessing technology. There's so many things we could address, and we are at about an hour and 45 of a 2-hour presentation. So instead, I'm just going to say, let's do some Q&R. By the way, Q&R, the R is response, because I don't have all the answers, but I can respond to your questions, So if you have a question, I'd love to give you my best response to it. Yeah. Sure, okay. So the question is, if I want my child to be able to communicate with family and friends, people who are close to me, grandparents, godparents, that sort of thing, but I don't want them to always have to use my device, what can I do? So I know that Facebook Messenger recently, about a year ago, I think, they rolled out a thing called Messenger for Kids. And I have not tried it myself, but my sister-in-law uses it, and she said it's fantastic. So that's one way. It allows me to set up this separate account for her, but it's tied to mine, it's linked to mine, so when she goes on, she can go and click in there, and then anybody I've given access to, she can have chat with on that. Another option is that Gmail has this chat function built into it, but you can limit it to the only people that can chat can be contacts. So I could set up a Gmail account for my child. I could put in there and say, okay, the only people that they can chat with are their contacts. I can put in their contacts. I can put in grandma and grandpa and so on. And then they can chat through there. It actually even has a video chat function. So they can click video chat and there they go and stuff like that. So those are a couple of options apart from, my own device. Great question. That about wraps it up. If you have other questions that you just don't want to ask publicly, go ahead and meet me afterwards and we'll talk. Otherwise, thanks for being here. I appreciate your attention and your participation in this and hope that this has been beneficial and that you've got at least just a few tools that are going to help you make some positive changes in your home or maybe just solidify a few things that you've already been working on. God's blessings. Thanks.